the greatest benefactor for the construction of this building was Mr. Erskine Ramsay. And the name of this school was the Erskine Ramsay Technical High School.
He was quite proud of the fact that it was Erskine Ramsay Technical High School in those days, because he believed in studying and working at the same time. But he was proud of this school, I'll tell you that. And he was proud of the fact, because he said it wasn't like giving money to Birmingham Southern or Howard College in those days to build a school and put his name on it, in Montevallo. This was something that he received really due to his work on the Board of Education. For 20 years he was chairman of the Board of Education.
We saw him build this school from the ground, and the mortar mix is a lot of bricks in here. The mixing of the mortar was all done by hand. Ramsay opened in September of 1930. This was converted to a gym now. Now the gymnasium was just the first floor, and the showers was a huge room. They had concreted the floor and the walls, and they had 5 or 6 shower heads, and the boys would go there and take the showers after playing. And the chemistry classes were held in this beautiful old home here, right down on the corner. Now there were other houses in here that they had other classes in.
In those days we had an old house down here on the corner where the parking lot is, and it was called the Annex. And Mr. Benham, who was the chemical professor, was quite a real interesting man. He wore a toupee, and every now and then he'd get real excited or something, and his toupee would jump forward over his face.
This is a football team, and my picture's in here.
Oh.
The football coach in those days was Cannonball White, and he would not let high school fraternity boys play on the football team. So if any of our members that were good enough to play football, they were just non-members during the football season. And
up there too. So there are 2 Ramsay High Schools. You're not just one. You're 2. You got a school in Pennsylvania named Ramsay.
And the 2 schools, I remember when I was going to school, they used to play football once a year. They'd come down here and play, and went up there to play against the school in Pennsylvania. And I can picture exactly how that school looks now.
See, there were quite a few of these old houses on the property, the annexes that we called them in those days, and so there was no room for ROTC or the band or the football team, anything. They all had to go down to Green Springs. Most of the practice in those days was out in the street. They'd block the street off and they would practice up and down the street because, see, we didn't have enough room around here.
Mr. Young was the principal of T.C. Young. He was a great individual. Everybody loved him.
They tried to instill in us in those days that the World War II was pretty imminent, and it was really important that we get a good education.
In 1940, you registered for the draft, and people started going into the armed services. And then 41, the war started, and everybody got scattered for about 5 years. Mm-hmm. And when you came back, nobody was the same. Everything changed during the war. Mm-hmm. So the people that you knew, some of them didn't come back.
So I know it's a very good education that you're receiving here, and we thought we got one back in the 30s also from here.
The fact that we were here during the World War II years, students had to participate and do their part, and Ramsay was awarded the Minuteman Service Flag Award, and that was for having 100% participation in buying war bond stamps. And
Food stamps to put in a book.
they actually raised $51,000, which was really quite significant. And that was enough, they said, to buy, at that time, I believe, 44 Jeeps for the Army. During the time that we were in school, Ramsay was at the top of the list in practically everything.
They had the bowling and the swimming and the tennis. The tennis team was
golf.
champions.
They had golf, had a golf team. And we had champions. The girls that marched out in front. And of course they wore Scottish outfits because of Ramsay having its Scottish history. They used the outdoor auditorium, which were just long wooden benches. And you sat on these long wooden benches.
It was just a fun place to get
See, we didn't know
together.
the difference. We thought that was wonderful. We didn't think we were deprived. Back then, too, see, you didn't go to a central location to get your classes set up. You had what we call, you had to run for classes, and you went to the actual classroom, hoping to get on the list before it was filled.
Mm-hmm. Because you had to go from, and if you were going over to an annex, and then you had another class down here, you wore your running shoes that day for sure.
Back then, in our day in school, they didn't dress like they do today. And this was like what the girls wore.
Now, most of the girls wore pleated skirts, or short pleated skirts.
And of course the boys, that's the way they dressed. Then they had one that some of the girls didn't like because they called it the waistline dances, and the boy paid for you according to the size of your waistline.
And they measured you
and
as
they
you came in the door.
measure you as you came in. Recollection of Mr. Young, yes, everybody
was
thought
crazy
the world of
about him.
Mr. Young. And
If he
somebody
saw
walked.
someone that he knew was walking to Ramsay, he picked him up and brought him to school. And they said they loved riding with Mr. Young. He always drove in second gear.
Miss Callan was everybody thought she was a hard teacher, but she was a great teacher. And when you came out of Miss Callan's class, you knew history.
Everybody that had Latin talked about Miss Davis, and they said she was so strict. And she said you would have to be given a recitation in class, and all of a sudden you would be in the middle of your recitation, and she'd say, next. And that meant be back here at 3 o'clock because you are awful. And they would have to come back, and they called Ms. Davis's 3 o'clock class, they called it the matinee, the Latin matinee.
Everybody loved Mr. Ordway, and he not only taught you math, he kind of taught you some values. It was a wonderful time growing up. Ramsay was young, and so were we. This is presented to Ramsay High School Library from the classes of 1942 and 1943. I hope I don't choke up, but I might. With heartfelt gratitude for an exceptional education, dedicated teachers, and wonderful memories at Ramsay High School, we make this contribution of computer equipment.
May this donation from 2 Ramsay classes of the past help enrich Ramsay classes of the future. We give it with love.
And it was the best school in the state academically and sports-wise then. And it was just more like a private school. When I come here, I feel sometimes like I'm 16 years old again. And football was a big thing, and we had 2 state championship teams here at Ramsay when I was here. And after the football games on Friday night, we had what they call the Big Five sock hop down at the auditorium, what's now Boutwell Auditorium. And so we would go down there and take our shoes off, our loafers off, and dance and jitterbug in our socks. And we had a wonderful time. We used to go in the courtyard a lot and sit around, and they had beautiful benches out there, wrought iron benches. It was really beautiful out there, and that was kind of a hangout. The girls did very few sports. The girls were not encouraged to go out for sports. It's not like it is now at all. I think probably the girls' advisor was probably my favorite teacher. She was so caring, and she counseled the students, and she just went out of the way to help each individual girl. Before Ramsay finally got an auditorium, students used to walk to Southside Baptist Church or use the open area outside the school for programs. Mr. Gardner, our principal, often presided over these open-air assemblies. We could hardly believe it when the groundbreaking was held. Students had been waiting for an auditorium for nearly 20 years. The auditorium was dedicated on October the 12th, 1950. We finally had our own place to hold programs and performances. We were first in everything in the school. You know, it was well landscaped. It was just perfect. Yeah, people came from all over the world to look at this school, believe it or not.
Ramsay was known as the elite high school. Ramsay picked up students from sections of the city that, like Forest Park and over the mountain, but not quite out of the city limits. And even to this day, when people ask me where I went to high school and I say Ramsay, I get this reaction because Ramsay was known as the rich kids' school. We certainly were not all rich. My favorite spot in the school was the old annex building. It was a big old red house that sat down here on the corner. And it was an old Victorian house that went back to the early history of Birmingham. And Ramsay bought it, and over there in that building, they put the physics and chemistry classes and the choir and band classes. And there was a covered walkway that went from the main building to the annex building. And when you had your classes over there, you either had a nice sunny day, which made for a nice walk over there, or a windy, blustery day that by the time you got to the old annex building, you were soaking wet, freezing cold, and there was never any heat. Pep rallies in the auditorium on Friday afternoon. We always had a big pep rally before the Friday night game. Those were fun. The cheerleaders don't do all those dances like they do now. They just did basic cheers. Their skirts were long. The cheerleaders came from the phys ed classes, and they were, of course, the most popular girls. Back when I was at Ramsay, being a majorette and being in the band was not popular. We had homecoming dances right here in our own gymnasium, and Miss Winifred Gallagher was my English teacher. I recall Miss Gallagher fondly because she would read Shakespeare to us, and her heart was really into it. Of course, you know, you always have students in the classes that think everything is funny, and there were many who didn't appreciate it, but when Miss Gallagher read it, you really had to stop and listen. She loved Shakespeare. She loved teaching English to young people. We had a teacher named Dr. Koski. Well, he was the speech teacher, and his classroom was in what we call the small auditorium. I don't know if you still have it. It was downstairs underneath the large auditorium, and he taught speech down there. Mr. Koski was very young and very good looking. Coach Mutt Reynolds is the other teacher I fondly recall. And of course, he was our football coach, but he also taught biology. He couldn't stand squeamish females. So rather than have us dissect in his class, he would let us out. He was able to deal more with people cutting that class than he was females' reaction to the frogs and worms and grasshoppers. And of course, back again, students will be students, and a lot of his little creatures ended up in places on dissecting day other than the lab in which they were intended. Ms. Parker taught choir and vocal. We had a concert choir, we had a girls' chorus, a male chorus, and we had an ensemble. And we sang Baroque music, and we had costumes, medieval costumes that we wore to perform. That music was performed a cappella. The things that went on in Ramsay's auditorium, it's real important that the auditorium be brought back to what it was, because young people, you'll never know some of the memories that are lurking in the walls in that auditorium. Some of the music that probably has been absorbed into that old plaster. It's this building and this school and that auditorium are precious memories. Recall also the National Honor Society tappings. That was a special day too, Honor Society. I never went to high school with any black classmates because it was in the fall of '64 that Ramsay became integrated, so we were an all-white student body and never had the privilege. And Miss Kennedy was our librarian. She was a very strict lady. She stayed on me all the time for talking, and I had a bad tendency to keep books a little longer than they were supposed to be, like maybe a year and a half. I had all that to deal with before I graduated to get the books back and pay these horrendous fines and everything. But I'm sitting here right now remembering all of that, and it never occurred to me back then that one day I would be 51 because I was only 17. You just never think it will happen, but it does, and once that diploma is given to you, it happens faster than you can imagine.
The first black student that was chosen to go to Ramsay went to Ullman High School with my brother. And my brother, his name is Dr. Richard Walker. He's a surgeon here in Birmingham. And he went to school with my brother at Ullman High School, and my brother would tell the story of how they chose Richard Walker to come here because he was the first black student here, and they actually did a whole lot of research to find or to pick the best student that to desegregate the school. He was kind of like Jackie Robinson, you know. They had to pick just the right person to desegregate baseball, and Richard Walker was very similar to that. And I think he came up here in 1964 or 63. But he went to school with my brother at Ullman. He was in my brother's class, and my brother remembered how they came to the school and got him out of class, and you know, the whole 9 yards of choosing him to go to Ramsay. So,
well, I remember when we were going to be integrated, and for about a week or so there, the police barricaded the ends of the blocks, and you had to have business at the school to be allowed to even drive up here on the block, you know, let the students and the teachers through. And I can remember working here and hearing the crowds, because they had down beyond the barricades, the people were down there chanting and making the move. Then that first year we had one young man come. I don't remember his last name. His first name was Richard. And he has since become a very prosperous and well-known doctor. I think he must have had a kind of a miserable time that first year. Nobody mistreated him. Nobody bothered him. But he stayed to himself completely. And I just don't think anybody had much to say to him or to do with him. He was all alone.
I came from a situation of having teachers who were, you know, genuinely concerned and thought about you as a person and a student, to a situation where that was not the case.
We were told that we had to stand in the halls during changes of class. We had to patrol the restrooms because our principal felt like if anyone was going to cause trouble for him, it would be between classes.
I came here in the fall of 1971, and very young, very ready to start educating the world, but I found out that Ramsay was not quite in the same enthusiastic mode I was in. A couple of years before, the high school that had traditionally been the black high school, or one of the black high schools, Allman, had been bought by UAB, and as a result of this, the students were moved. The story goes that they were moved out to West End High School the first year. I don't know because it was not here, and I'm not really sure. I know it was moved out somewhere, the students were rather. And then the next year, some court system, obviously not from Birmingham, decided to move them to Shades Valley, as the story goes, and only halfway through the year discovered that that was a county school, and you could not move city students to a county school. So the following year, for some of the seniors, they were at Ramsay. So they had 4 schools that they had been to, and they were, needless to say, not too excited about the fact that they had just been shuffled from one school to another.
It was a good school. It was fun my freshman year. It was different from elementary school. Had good pep rallies. Had a good football team, good basketball team. Probably my most memorable subject and teacher was English. That was taught by Mrs. Ragland when I was in the 11th grade. And choir, that was taught by a lady by the name of Miss Selman. She played the violin in the Birmingham Symphony, and sometimes she would play her violin for us during practices, and when she wanted to show us how a note sounded, or just different quality about the way she taught. She was just a good teacher.
And it was definitely a school in transition. It was moving from a basically all-white school to a truly, totally integrated school, not without a few pains along the way. Around 1976, Ramsay became an alternative school. I believe it was the 76-77 school year. It's probably one of the best things that ever happened to the school. It really revitalized it. If we'd had a little paint, it would have been an all-new school. But the idea behind it was that there was to be a 50-50 ratio. I think there was an entrance exam from the very beginning. Students were admitted on the basis of their test scores plus their recommendations from the grammar school, elementary school where they attended, as well as their, I think their Stanford test or achievement test were also considered. And of course today we have something along the same line. Ramsay Alternative was a hit. People wanted to come here. We had a waiting list. It was almost like this was the end school to be, and if you were going to be in a Birmingham school, you wanted to be at Ramsay. Now the principal at that time was Mr. George Thomas. Mr. Thomas was a man who had seen it all. He was a man who had seen it go from a school that was, for example, involved in football to a school that discontinued football. We had an incident involving a young man who was, well, he died of a brain aneurysm during football practice, and as a result of this, the football coach got out of coaching and eventually got out of teaching. There were quite a few alternative schools, but we were the alternative school with emphasis on arts. So it was a very artistic school during that period of time.
Some students got together and decided it was just a tad bit too hot and we was tired because nobody was taking us serious when we asked for air conditioning, so we got together and put the word out, or rather they did, and everybody walked out until they threatened to suspend us, and then we walked back in. We didn't get a chance to experience the air conditioning, at least not to my recollection. It's good to know y'all got some, though, somebody benefited from it. You hear all these stories about high school, and then you get there and they give you all these books, and you had more than one floor to go to, and you had more threatening teachers, like Mr. Foster. Top of being late, I couldn't find the class. So when I finally did get into class, he was writing on the board, so I had to figure out a way to try to sneak in so that I wouldn't have to spend the whole classroom in the office explaining how come I didn't get to class on time. So I waited until he was writing on the board, and I tried to sneak in. As soon as I sat down, he turned around and he looked right at me, and I thought that I was going to be kicked out that day. But I got lucky, I guess.
On the inside, aesthetically, we're probably the worst looking building in the city. Outside, we look real nice. The lights, when you pull up outside at night and the lights are on it, it's with really a special looking place from the south side. You walk inside, it's really bad. And my hat's off to all the students doing as well as they do, and to be motivated to learn. When you walk inside, this place is really dreary on the inside.
We have a building that is crumbling as we speak around us. And we have had, and I've spoken with people who've graduated from Ramsay High School in the 80s, the 70s, and the 60s, who cannot believe that something has not been done about the condition of the building.
It seems almost ironic that we don't have an auditorium. First we didn't have one, then we got this fabulous auditorium, and of course when I first came here it was in wonderful shape. Then we got the low bid on the roof, and at that point the ceiling started deteriorating.
Either they should, sell the school or just gut the inside of it and repair it, because, I mean, for what we have here and for the kind of students that we have here, it's really not fair for the school to be the dump that it is.
Well, when I tell you what makes a good building are good people inside the building. That's the only thing we can hope for, and hopefully our time will come. That's all I can say.
The heads of Brombergs, Pozitz, Sobels, all of these well-known family names around Birmingham, children came here to school.
In business, literally dozens upon dozens of names, household names in Birmingham. I'll give you just a few of them, and I would imagine that even if you did not graduate with them, you'll know them. Ralph Allen, Houston Bryce, Marvin Engel, Emil Hess, Eugene Moore, Ed Salem, Frank Samford, Fred Sington. We have even had someone in the CIA, Miles Copeland, who is a Ramsay graduate. We've also had some government officials, very well known. Sam Pointer, Albert Lee Smith, and Angie Grooms, who became Angie Grooms Proctor. In the field of medicine, we have Jack Featheringill, actually John Featheringill. We also have Thomas Gaskin, Richard Walker, Wiley Livingston, Carolyn Foreman, many others made this list as well. In the role of civic activist, we have had two former graduates, Peggy Spain and Dora Stern. In the field of entertainment, we have Louise Fletcher. I think everyone knows the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest star.
Good morning, Miss Ratchet.
Good morning.
And Wayne Rogers, who attended Ramsay but didn't graduate from here. Philip Alford.
Well, no wonder then. Scout's been reading since she was born, and she don't start school the next month.
I guess probably the one that is the most famous as far as Ramsay's concerned is Fannie Flagg, because she has not only become a famous actress, but she's become required reading at Ramsay, and I wonder how she'd feel about that now.
Classes from the 30s own had just, they all have that feeling. They all love Ramsay. They want to come back. And that's good. And sometimes, though, our graduates are going to be our best ambassadors.
I think Ramsay gave me a wonderful, excellent background in everything, in all my subjects. So.
We had quite a few nice teachers, and they were very dedicated, and the students liked the teachers. I think. Well, we respected them, and we were a little afraid of them too.
These basic skills are what got me started in the business world.
Well, it was always a good school.
But the teachers, well, they were wonderful, and the students that came back for the reunion had nothing to say but praises for the teachers. They
And for
really did.
Ramsay.
And for Ramsay.
So perhaps we were a more unsophisticated group of children, but I think that being held to these standards was tremendously beneficial.
We had a lot of fun, but we had a lot of learning too.
I think it's the finest thing that happened to Birmingham because of the type students you have. And
I am just absolutely enthralled with the excitement and the potential that the young people here have.
I hope that for the future classes of Ramsay High School, that something is done about the building. I do not want to see it knocked down. I feel that Ramsay is a vital part of the Board of Education for what we offer. And so I hope that something is done about the condition of the building.